Venri Chapter 33. Garrus. She put on her brave face for visitors. She put on her brave face for doctors and representatives of the Alliance. She was always brave, of course, but this was a different type of bravery than that required to face an enemy. This was the guarded and recursive bravery of experience she'd gained from facing down friends and allies. She had the same camouflaged determination in answering a simple welcome home question as she'd had arguing with Rex over support for Palaven. Garrus grew to be sure that she did not feel safe. She did not have the easy manner he knew as her hallmark. Yes, she was traumatized, but when had that not been true? She was still at war. She used her fatigue as an excuse to defer questions, often. She was fatigued, yes, but she feigned and exaggerated it for her own unseen and unspoken purposes. He knew she could still, in this shape, have killed most of the people on this floor before they were aware she was armed. She probably wouldn't have to be armed, it just might take a little bit longer, but make less noise. He'd heard the story about how she'd ambushed the recovery team on the Citadel, armed and suited and claiming the station as her own. Her diminished capacity was still beyond most people's capability, and her mind was blessedly intact. That had always been her best weapon, and it was undimmed or she wouldn't be managing this psychological fan dance. When he'd asked her about her implants and her resistance to their repair, obliquely and casually, her gaze had slipped to his arm, where his Omnitool was. She had looked expansively around the room and said as though it were a joke, "Garrus, I can tell you that right now the same way I could have told you about my strategy on the CIC of the SR2 when we first got there." Her eyes were not joking. He understood her answer. She was telling him she couldn't tell him here. To other implied questions, she assured him later, not in words, but in the same signals they'd developed over years of concealing their purpose from surveillance while telegraphing true intent to each other. Her eyes and hands made promises only he could see. Her reserve and calculation slipped off like the costume it was when he was near and they were alone. He saw less of Shepard and more of his Venri. She was physically weaker by far, partly from the loss of her implants and partly from injury and deconditioning. He expected her to be frustrated by her weakness, but instead she was dealing with it in a way he would never have predicted. If anything, she was seeking weakness. He just didn't know why. He stayed with her in the hospital every moment. She slept in his arms, and the medical staff never asked him to leave. They tended to treat him like a nonverbal bodyguard, and he encouraged that impression. He was sure his concerns for her security had been so impressed upon them that they were grateful for his presence. He observed when she was in surgery. He held her hand when she underwent exams and procedures. He assisted her feigned fatigue with glares, and if that didn't work, occasionally growls and a silent but escalating predatory stance. This was directed at anybody attempting to cross her carefully defined borders, either by repeating medical advice she hadn't welcomed the first time, or by asking questions she'd already declined to answer. Hackett was accustomed to being able to order Morim to do things, and Morim was not orderable at this moment. Hackett was trying to flog her one more mile for the good of the Alliance. He tried to hammer at her, made further attempts at interrogation, asking her to repeat her story as though it were testimony. Failing that, he had urged her to take immediate steps toward establishing her presence back on Earth publicly for morale. The real word that should have been used was propaganda, and everyone in the room knew it. After she had given several polite negative or deferring answers, her face had tightened to a look Garrus recognized. She wanted to hit Hackett. Garrus had stepped between them, using his height advantage and righteous anger. He'd growled at Hackett, entirely willing to do bodily harm deferred in the past if Hackett did not back down. Moram's time spent incarcerated for the good of the Alliance didn't seem to be something that Hackett remembered. It was time to remind him. When Hackett had finally taken a good read of the room and compared it to his purposes, he had apologized, and there had been no more pressure from him. He had extended friendship, expressions of support, and a promise to Garrus that if they needed anything, to ask. Garrus's intervention had caused her carefully tragic face to break into a huge smile when they were finally alone. He got a hand squeeze and an "I love you so much" from her, with a follow-up kiss to be remembered. He'd half expected her to chew him out for intervening, which could have been interpreted, as always, as a sign of her weakness. It confirmed that she wanted to be seen as weak, and he hadn't read her wrong. She'd been the unquestioned, occasionally questioned, alpha for so long, and now she was ceding that territory to him, not just privately, but in public and ostentatiously so. He was still hypervigilant to what it was she wanted, and was trying to get her what he thought that might be without her having to tell him. She wasn't without will, he wasn't without service. Through their conspiracy, it looked like he was in charge to outsiders who didn't have the signals from her or the knowledge of her that he had. She would express a softly spoken or implied preference. He would provide the muscle to hold that line. She could have done it on her own. She wouldn't have caved to Hackett or medical demands. But Garrus took a fierce joy in conveying more forceful and aggressive expressions of her preferences. He'd choked back his own protective instincts and given them outlet only through his rifle for years, and now they were allowed full range. It was blissful to directly intervene on her behalf, and she always rewarded him for it. She never called him off or discouraged his posturing. Her smiles and looks and comments when they were alone conveyed to him that she knew he was doing it and enjoying it, and she wanted him to enjoy himself. Finally. She had near-constant visitors until he limited the hours available for visitation with Dr. Mbega's sanction, resulting in Moram's accelerated healing and ability to rest. Visitors brought them food and news and stories. There were flowers and mementos of hoped healing around her hospital room, and a room adjacent was filled with the same. He'd been close enough to wake and soothe her through nightmares, and she needed less sedation. Their bodies burned for it, but there was no sex in the hospital. There was endless kissing. Her sense of paranoia was a real thing, sitting between them like a camera, influencing her moves and choices. She would kiss and cling and cry and cradle his head between her hands. He knew he was not the problem. She made that clear. But there were problems. Two in particular: technology and the word hero. It was subtle, but he knew her, and he knew her moods and her behavior. Congratulations and visits from anybody from the Normandy, anybody that had served with her. They could tell her anything, call her anything. She was there for that, there for them. She was herself, with her easy charm and humor, only limited by her real fatigue and pain, and the strain of staying on whatever her script was while on medication. There were polite and less than polite requests from reporters, but she spoke only to Diana, who had the same rules of casual ease and trust as anybody else who had served on the Normandy. Diana was the primary source of information regarding the Normandy's trials, missions, crew, and history. Diana had earned her exclusive access through trial by combat. Moram rewarded her lavishly for her discretion and help while on the Normandy, and signed off on several pieces Diana had prepared ahead of time, with the promise of declassification later. As a result, Javik became a celebrity of the same caliber Rex had been after Saren. Moram's telling of events at the Citadel was short and convincing, and he was sure there was more to it. She wasn't known as a liar. She was so good at it she never got caught, so he wasn't surprised when she wasn't questioned on the details she presented. She only allowed herself a brief stiffening of her spine and a slightly stilted smile when someone praised her for her heroics. It probably looked like pride to someone else, but it became more and more painful to him personally as he saw the pattern repeat. Everyone wanted to thank her for her heroics, and she felt as though she were being stabbed in the heart when she heard that word. Moram always offloaded the credit to her crew, to those who had given their lives to the conflict. She'd always been this way, but it was becoming less of a preference and more of an imperative. He saw the problems, he just didn't know what the solutions were yet. Moram made no move to either resign or reassert her command. She'd saluted James and called him commander. Liara had visited, and there had been tears but no melding of minds. If the pattern continued, he wondered if Moram would ever tell him what was bothering her, or if it would fester, or if it would heal and pass away into memory with a dismissive shrug of her shoulders and an insightful remark about her odd behavior. Her leg didn't bother her at all in comparison to the words. She didn't want a prosthetic, but he'd asked her to get one, and she allowed one that was mechanical to be made. It was nothing like the more advanced and stabilized technological wonders that were possible. To be fair, it was for her foot and not her hand, so there was no real need for all the bells and whistles, except that a very good one would be seamless and help her. People wouldn't know that she'd lost a leg at all. And she deserved a very good one. The actual loss of her leg, other than the pain it had caused her, didn't bother him. Entirely to the contrary, he'd happily carry her everywhere. Off with the other one as far as he was concerned. Perhaps she really didn't know how Turians valued scars. A missing limb was an even greater sign of valor. As far as valor went, she visually outranked him now. As she should. She was always beautiful, but he'd always felt vaguely sorry for her in terms of valor, looking as though she'd never seen battle. Perhaps that was what this was all about. Her symbols. Her memorials. The war was over. Whatever she had been, she didn't want to be a hero. She had also rejected being called a Siha. Maybe it was because of the lost. Edie was gone, and if Edie could have no technical upgrades, Moram wouldn't take them either. Spirits, Moram, your poetry makes your life difficult. This behavior was perhaps her grief made solid in the world. They were out of the hospital within a week of his arrival. They were moved to an undamaged apartment close enough to the hospital for house calls. Tally and Trainer had both swept for bugs, finding none. Once Tally and Trainer had left, James had made certain nobody entered, and had arranged for prominent security on entrance choke points by volunteer, past, and present crew members of the Normandy. Javik, Rex, Grunt, and many humans had volunteered for guard rotation, leaving the entrance Moram and Garrus used, unmanned, but not unwatched. Dr. Imbega would make the trip to them more often than Moram would travel back to the hospital. Karen had promised to be by often. Karen was now working at the hospital and had aided in Moram's care before discharge. When they went to the new apartment, they had very few personal belongings. He had a bag with the same amount of food in it, along with a rifle. She'd brought nothing with her from the Citadel, and had left her leg behind. Someone had found a fish tank and transported all her fish here, and Boo was in his cage. Ship models were across one wall. Fortunately, no screaming head. He hoped Vega had commandeered it, and he'd never see it again. There was a full Turian and human pantry and working kitchen. There was a working refrigerator and freezer full of prepared food, including luxuries, he'd been told, like ice cream. There were celebratory bottles of human alcohol favoring whiskey, and Turian alcohol had also been delivered. They'd been escorted here, and she'd walked through the large room and exposed picture window on one side. She took off her prosthetic leg and leaned her shoulder on the frame, looking out at the devastated city. There were huge, fallen bodies of reapers strewn to the horizon, the arching shapes inescapable. There was nowhere for the eye to rest without a reminder. His instincts still made him nervous. He didn't want her anywhere near a window like that. If he wanted her to loosen her hypervigilance, he should lighten up on his, except that he didn't consider it paranoia. There had been, and likely still were, those who would want to kill her for whatever stupid reason people came up with for wanting to kill her. He was sure they could come up with new reasons that made no sense. He didn't want to try to figure them out, he just wanted to protect her. Did indoctrination tech stop without a signal, or were there individual artifacts that still worked independently? Could there be newly indoctrinated forces even now? In the meantime, he could just convince her to not stand there like a huge target. Her hair was up. He stepped behind her and played with the wisps that trailed down her neck, kissing the skin there. He snapped off her hair tie with a flick of his talon, spread her hair over her shoulders, and pulled his fingers through it. She leaned back against him. Picture windows bugging the crap out of you, huh? I'm gonna pick you up now. Partly because of the window, but mostly because I want to pick you up. She hit a control and the window went opaque. The blinds came down. I could do without the view anyway. He lifted her in his arms and she rested her head in the crook of his neck. I can carry you over a threshold. Isn't that a human tradition? After being married? She smiled. Yes, right after a marriage, though. And the threshold into a building, not the thresholds inside a building. Damn. Oh well, fuck it. We'll start new traditions. Grab the bottles. He leaned her down and she picked up a bottle of Turian liquor and a bottle of whiskey. Glasses, too. Oh, screw the glasses. Live it up. Drink from the bottle. He gave her a slow look up and down. Uncivilized. I like it. She muffled a snort as he carried her into the bedroom. No stupid picture windows. Good. He sat down in a Turian-style chair. Someone had taken pains to make the apartment human and Turian-friendly. Small favors were appreciated. He took his bottle from her and opened it, took a swig, and she did the same with hers. He looked at her intently and said, "Okay. Commence interrogation." She quickly took another swig. Wait, no, wait. I need to be really drunk for that one. I know you're concerned about my Omni-tool and monitoring, but believe me, after what we just went through, Trainer taught me more about it than I thought possible. Nobody is watching or listening to us through this thing. We also did a security sweep on the apartment. She nodded at him. Okay. Thank you for your patience and planning ahead. Spoiler alert. I am going to be very upset. I may throw things. As long as it's not the alcohol. She tilted her head. I am weak-willed, weak of body, and I was planning on telling you anyway, so you're in luck. He almost spit out his swig in progress. Weak-willed my ass. But you agree about the weak of body? He shrugged. Yep, that's just science. She held out her remaining leg. Now I have a really weird number of toes. He nudged her. Quit stalling. Spill. She took a hard pull on the bottle and then rested it in her lap. Anderson went up the beam first. He got to a console before I did. When I got there, the elusive man was in the room. He had definitely figured out some things about indoctrination. He tried to convince me to use that power to control the Reapers. He was able to control me there for a while. He made me shoot Anderson. Garrus closed his eyes and pressed his hand to her hair, cradling her head in his comparatively huge palm. I have had time to... these aren't fresh wounds. 3+ months alone is some time to process. There are nightmares, but... Anyway, Anderson didn't die immediately. He and I convinced the elusive men that he was indoctrinated. He was as far gone as Saren had been, sprouting circuitry. He didn't need me, he could have just looked in a mirror to know that. He took a gun to his head. Garrus held very still, though he wanted to growl. She was telling him, and telling him without reservation, because he'd asked her to. He might be dreaming now, but he didn't interrupt. She took another pull from her bottle. Oh yeah, getting drunk. I did that a lot on the Citadel. I don't think I ever told you. In my dreams, I was chasing a little boy that I saw on Earth when we evacuated. He had managed to make it to a shuttle, and the Reapers vaporized it on takeoff. I tried to help him, but all he had to say to me was, "You can't help me." And my nightmares just grabbed onto that phrase and rode me with it. When I reached the actual catalyst, which was not that console but an entirely new section of the Crucible, I was greeted by the image of this little boy, presenting me with choices. I had 3 choices. She explained a bizarre set of circumstances, and he wondered how much of this had been hallucination. I bet you're wondering about hallucination. I did. I do. But the results are the results. I couldn't control the Reapers. Not after what the elusive man had just done. Plus, it said I'd die, and I had... You had another choice. Hollow cold slid down his spine. She nodded. I couldn't synthesize. I probably should. That's what I keep thinking. If I'd chosen that, if... He said words, but he knew she'd thought them already. We'd all be something else, and you'd be dead. I wouldn't be me anymore. We'd have had no choice, no free will. It told me that it's inevitable that we reach synthesis again. If anything, that thing was convincing that evolution will bring us there. But I chose to restart the cycle. Even though it promised that conflict would begin again, with the choices I made... Listen, Lauren, look. I know I'm biased. I'm biased as hell. But you're alive. I am sorry for the loss of synthetic life, Edie, and... Oh, fuck. The Geth. We can't talk to the Quarians, but I'm certain that the Geth are gone. Not just Legion. Everything he worked for. All the people that died because they relied on technology. That's on me. I killed them. I don't even know if Quarians made it at all. Our Follis everywhere died because their suits stopped working. He grabbed at his first thoughts in desperation. Okay. Oh, spirits. I understand. I get why you don't want to tell anybody. You made the right choice. No. Listen. You made the right choice in not telling them, and in what you did at the Crucible. You made me a promise. You kept it. Garrus, I'm not sorry I'm alive. It sucked there for a good long while, don't get me wrong, but I'm not... I couldn't control them. I couldn't synthesize. You know me, that if I'd had to make another choice, even one that cost my life, I would have, because I wouldn't have seen that I had a choice. I don't think I had a real choice. But the cost of that choice is one that other people had to and have to pay. Then on top of that, I'm not going to explain that to anybody. Not out of fear, out of having learned something about fucking complication. It's too much to ask people to believe or to think that a small human had all that power and made a choice that transformed the galaxy. It's too much to ask that I walk by your side and make you the target of every single being that would have wanted me to make a different choice, or to be praised by people who agreed with the choice I made. It would put the attention on me, and all attention should be on rebuilding, on life. Maybe Edie will come back. Maybe the Geth will revive. Maybe the Quarians will recover. Maybe the Volus are fine, but I don't know. I do know a lot of synthetics and organics died because of my choice. Even if it's just because a dead Reaper fell on top of them after the fact. What I do know is that I was, and am, willing to let them be the cost. I am not hiding from reality. I am coping. It's ugly, but I'm coping. To everyone else, I just want to be the ignorant, weak lady that pushed a button. The future can't be about me. It can't be about my choices. The future has to be about other people's choices. Garrus sat still through the pain slicing through him. That's why you don't want tech in your body. I am never going back to the Citadel. I don't want it rebuilt. I want it blown from the sky. And I know it won't happen. The Keepers are gone, so there's some hope that it can't be rebuilt. But whatever happens, there's still tech out there that will be studied. The relays will be rebuilt, everything will be regained, and it will fucking start over. I have faith that we can learn, that we can overcome, that this memory will stay in people's minds and conflict can be avoided. Maybe synthesis can be reached spontaneously and peacefully if we do it right. People might remember that when it came down to it, we all worked together. We can't repeat this asshole cycle or come up with an equally fucked up solution. The Alliance knows what I know about Reapers. There's enough information already out there to know historically what the Reapers did and why. But I'm not sure about the outcome. This was actually a choice of hope. Not forcing everything together and eliminating diversity out of the fear of being apart or being different. Not controlling something that was fucked up in its inception, only to have it turn and bite my immortal missing you, or even worse, forgetting you ass later. No more Reaper tech. It was all designed as an overly tempting and elegant trap. We got convenience and utility, and then on the back end, our cultural identities were overwritten, or we were slaves, or we were dead. This is the biggest hope I've ever had. And I'll never see its full cost in the present or in the future. But I do believe in it. I believe in it with everything that's left of me. But what if I have... He squeezed her shoulders. What if you have? You just saved my life and yours and everyone else's who is still alive. We were Reaper Chow otherwise. She laughed and raised her bottle to him, took a long drink, and made her face reflecting the strength of the alcohol. Yep, you get it. You have a firm grasp on the issues. He tried to take it all in. I can't decide if that's the most selfish or the most selfless thing you've ever done. Yep. Probably never will. No way to know. We have what we have now. I will tell you. If you hadn't asked me to make you that promise, if I hadn't had the thought that you were alive out there somewhere, and probably really mad at me to hold on to, I would never have survived. He nuzzled her throat. Really? So, I did something, huh? She turned to kiss him, near frantic. You did something. We did something. I made you more than one promise, Venri. I told you my purpose was you, and I will never break that promise. I don't want command. I won't take command from me. The only thing I could do now on the Reaper subject is fuck things up by being forced to tell the truth or defend the truth. Then I'd have given people ideas that would fester. I'd create a self-fulfilling prophecy. I want others to have new ideas that flourish. I want all the fucked up choices of the cycles on the Citadel to be gone now. Yes, I have the arrogance to choose to overrule the judgment and warnings of a creature around long enough for time I can't comprehend. I choose to not believe that destruction and stupidity are inevitable. Even if I would be the best commander ever and brought hamsters and joy to the galaxy, that's not who I am now. I'm done. I've done enough, and if I voluntarily put your life or mine in danger again after all we've been through, I would never forgive myself. If you want something I can get for you, tell me now, before I toss all the power I have away with both hands. You can be whatever you want. Just let me know what that is, and I'm there for you. You want the Normandy? I'll get her for you. Now we do what you say. I follow you around. I will not be a hero. I will not be a Siha. I will only be your Venri. How the hell do you do that? You've lost a leg, and I'm thinking you're all vulnerable, and you could still kick my ass. She lifted her bottle in salute. Damned right. You sure you want my full attention? Oh, yeah. I think so. You drunk yet? She grinned at him. I promise I can't walk a straight line. He stared at her for a shocked moment and then barked a startled laugh. Her sly smile was a beautiful, if practiced, thing. It was calculated to reassure him. Her answers echoed in his mind, and he told her. We're here for a while, Venri. Fortunately, there was enough of a Turian population on Earth and in London that new food is being grown and raised here. That will continue. I can live here. Palavin is far away, and He was sure she'd thought of it, and he wanted to know what she wanted as much as she wanted to know what he wanted. I can't ask you to live inside or always in a suit, at potential risk constantly from the sun on Palaven. She met his eyes with all the courage and determination she possessed. Yes, you can. He lifted her chin. Yes, I could. But now you do what I say. So you tell me honestly how you feel about living in a suit. You just did it for months. She closed her eyes and revulsion swept over her features. I reserve the right to change my mind later. But right now, the idea evokes visceral disgust. At least here on Earth, I don't feel the need to make a nest in a shuttle. Although if you find me curled up in the bathtub sleeping, don't panic. I still have a strong instinct to hide. It might leak out. I'll have to get used to solid ground for a while. For now, I don't want to be at risk for decompression or have to live in a suit. But you'd do it for me. I would do it for you. I want you to be happy. He shook his head vehemently. You will not sacrifice your own happiness for mine. I don't want that. I will never want that. She corked a smile. You might. I hear I'm a pain in the ass. I looked at her face, at all her focus on him, and he was humbled by it. Come on, Garrus. You've done it for me. Now it's my turn to get ordered around and complain about it. He considered what she was saying, what it meant, and then told her. Okay. I think you should get an Omni tool so I can talk to you when we're separated. She smiled in pure concession and held out her arm. Nail it in? He raised a brow plate skeptically. No argument? She shrugged. Talking to you is enough of an incentive. Just not this one. A new one. I want to destroy this one. You do your thing and make sure the new one can't be monitored. You wanting something shifts the math for me, you know. It's a huge plus. I don't want a biotic implant, though. You okay with that? Venri, I want you to be happy, too. Without an implant, it just means I can shove you against a wall any time, and you can't do anything about it. He ran his hand over her thighs, curling a finger along the edge of her missing leg. You are also going to get a seamless prosthetic that you won't throw in the corner. Or I carry you everywhere. I know you're a champion hopper, but I want to dance with you. You don't need a constant reminder of the most pain you've ever been in. You don't need a memorial. If you truly mean to put the past in the past and move forward to honor new ideas, you'll do this for us. She closed her eyes and pressed her lips together. All right. When she opened her eyes, they were bright and clear. I want to dance with you, too. I know you're in charge, and I trust you, but please, I can't have anybody in my head. Ever. I know I have to shut Liara out, and it breaks my heart, but I can't go to an Asari for any assistance ever again. If I'm incapacitated, I need you to... I'm sorry, I'm a wreck, but I can't have anybody in my head with me unless it's you. I am promising to do my best to never, ever be incapacitated again. If I put myself in any new danger, it will be because you said so. We will always be in danger from the situations I have already put us in, and their consequences. And it might happen. He put his bottle on the floor, picked hers out of her hands, and put that down as well. Finally, they could establish a space for just them. No intrusions. She was capable of bearing this burden alone, and left to her own choices, she would have. She was choosing to share it with him because he had asked, because she had promised, whatever the personal cost she had to bear as a result. Her thoughts while being in the hospital alone had been of finding him. Her thoughts after he'd arrived had been trying to figure out how to make him happy and protect him. She'd give him the Normandy or any ship, get all of her abilities and strength back to follow him if that was what he wanted. Her struggle in the hospital had been about him and what he wanted or needed from her. His heart hammered with what she was offering. With this new information, he realized with a chill in his gut and spine that she never would have made it off that station if she hadn't had the hope of returning to him. She would have died to serve her grief, her pain, and to hide the truth, to give people a chance for a new future. Of course, she would have made a choice that had involved her death if it felt necessary to her. Choosing to live was the harder path, and she'd done that only for him. If it made him happy, it was worth it to her. She'd wear a suit. She'd pick up a gun. She'd go straight back into danger. Though she despised the thought of those things. She meant it. She would do anything, be anyone. She was all in. For him. He told her, "Then it's just us. I promise I won't ask for or allow Asari intervention for your mental health. This means I have to shut out Liara also, and Javik can't touch us. That part shouldn't be hard. We'll stay on Earth for now. We'll stay together. We won't take any jobs requiring separation from each other. We won't generate any new danger. I won't ask that of you. I don't need that. I don't want that. You resign your commission. If travel opens to Palaven again and you want to go, you tell me. Our family will understand if not, and if travel is open, they can come visit us here. You're gonna get a new leg. You're gonna get the best leg. An ostentatiously obnoxious leg. It will be very Shepard clan. You're going to get a new Omni tool. And there's a program I'm going to install that monitors your biometrics. She listened solemnly. He couldn't read her expression other than attentive. Then she gaped at him after his last sentence hit his shoulder, to which he obligingly fake winced. Damn it, I knew it. Sometimes you just told me I was hungry or tired. You always showed up at exactly the right time. I thought you could smell it on me, but I could never figure out how you could smell it on me from 2 decks away in order to show up right on time. He grinned at her. It kept me from insanity when you were down with the Leviathan. Indulge me. You don't want to wear suits. I don't want to let you out of my sight without knowing what's happening. We're both going to have to indulge each other's crazy. We've earned this crazy. She shook her head, but it was with humor and not denial. You are such an asshole. Okay. Plan on letting me out of your sight often? He grinned at her. No. I have no idea if we're still rich or if any of the currency we have still has any value, but we'll find something to do to make money if not. In the meantime, we're not being charged for our keep. We've got a personal store of ore on board the Normandy, and it can be used to make components that will be needed for rebuilding. We've got some bags of precious gems and metals within easy reach, and if travel opens up, we have fortunes scattered throughout the world. We'll be fine, Venri. We'll find our way. She smoothed a hand over the side of his face. I hope we hear from Palaven soon. He put his hand over hers. We will. He leaned in and down and kissed her because he could, his questions disappearing. Anything else you want to know or you have to tell me that can't wait? Just, why did you stop kissing me? Good question. He kissed her again, feeling her hands on his shoulders. She was still bruised, along with incisions from procedures. His hands were light on her skin, trying to learn her new form. She smelled different, but not dissonant. They were still so good together. He breathed her in, brushing his mouth under her ear. Where their physical vitality and resilience faded, he felt an overarching protectiveness. The knowledge that he could finally shield her with his body. She'd opened her mind and heart to him and trusted him to guard them as well. That freely given right of dominion over their future without reservation clicked into place, not to be wrenched away when the next danger sent her running ahead, not looking back. Now that he could order her to do something, she'd already promised it. She would never leave him behind again. He was gentle and patient, chasing the things he wanted and knew brought her pleasure with his hands and his mouth. He touched places on her face he had dreamed of being able to touch, with reverence. The instincts of panic and pressure were ingrained in his muscles, and he had to force himself to relax. He confessed, I couldn't breathe while you were gone. It's going to take my body, my heart, a little while to realize you're really here. I know you couldn't breathe without pain because your body was broken. I'm going to try to forgive myself for not being there for you. I'm here, my beautiful Venri, whose mind is swarming with the choices of history and the next 50,000 years. I know it's not that simple, and you're not fine. You don't have to be. I will guard your body, your heart, your mind. One day, we will both wake up and only see each other, not the shadows. Until that day, I need you to know that every living person you ever encounter, you gave them their lives. We have our lives because of you. You can't only count the costs. You have to count the potential outcome, which would have been nothing without you. What we have now is of infinite value compared to what we would have had. Please, see that. For me, for us. No more ruthless calculus. She twisted and threw her arms around his cowl, wrapped her whole leg around him with the other pressed to his side, and cried into his neck. He felt the huffs of her harsh breathing and the racking of her sobs. She wanted forgiveness from people she couldn't ask, for something she couldn't disclose. She'd be praised for all the wrong things, and each word would grind at her like sandpaper on her skin and glass in her heart. The worst damage would always be internal, and she'd hide that with her resourceful and practiced self-denial, even and possibly especially from him. Thank the spirits he had a way to drive it from her mind even temporarily. Thank the spirits he knew she wanted him. Wanted that. Wanted them. When her tears slowed down and exhaustion sank her shoulders, he pulled her head back to look in her eyes. She was sad and desperate and in pain, and he was the best painkiller she knew. She'd gathered all her strength for this last and, hopefully, only telling of her truth. Now it was their truth. He would never ask her to say it again. They would both guard that truth. The convincing, strong, informative energy she'd needed to tell him the whole story had left her. And maybe she couldn't decide who to be right now. Circumstances had dictated her personality for so long. He'd thought that it was over on the Citadel. But it was now, when she was released from imminent life and death choice. He'd just made sweeping choices for them, and she didn't know who or how to be right now. Yet, he had hope that she could adapt to love and peace. It would take time. Whatever she needed, whoever she needed to be, He would be there. He would help her. He wanted to see her eyes now. Watch as the pain drained from her. Replace it with love, with bliss. He wanted to measure her progress in kisses and caresses. Her brows were drawn together in unmistakable helplessness. And he answered with all the gentleness he could put into his eyes and his voice and his hands. He knew she was unaccustomed to reverie, might start to twitch and shake and be gone from him if he were to touch her with the ferocity she'd always encouraged in him. The longer he could make her forget, the deeper he could influence her dreams, the better. His eyes hooded, and he told her who he wanted to be right now. You are such a lightweight. You're drunk. You are in so much trouble. And this is going to be fun. Her lips twitched, and her eyes flashed with humor, and possibly a fleeting regret for her lost strength. Then a flash of remembering she'd done it on purpose, and why. Complicated. Her every thought was complicated. He was determined to take those thoughts away from her. He needed to get reverie humming through her system. So he held her face in his hands and he kissed her. The state of her body reminded him of when he'd first been able to touch her and hold her in his arms. Bullets had ripped through her and given him her skin, her scent, her blood, and his bond. She had been and was battered and vulnerable, needing his restraint and vigilance every moment so she wouldn't do herself harm. Not for the first time, he wondered just how adaptive bonding was moment by moment, because his accustomed violence was gone. Violence was gone, but not fierce need. He had to keep the trembles from his hands, but he was able to do it. And he felt a source of pleasure and power from that effort. Now there was satisfaction and control and not frustration with it. The taste and scent of her under his mouth made him more careful, more attentive to her every sigh and movement. His blood simmered with knowing what to do. He thought about when she'd confessed that she thought he'd be bored with her. And he moved his mouth to her ear. Change your body. Change your nature. Change anything about yourself, Venri. I will find you. I will love you. I need you to have that Omni tool because I need you to know. If you are ever lost, you call me, and I will come to you. I will always find you. I don't care if it's because you want something off a high shelf, or if you just wanted to see me. I will come to you. I am for you, Venri. You are my chosen purpose, and all other purpose has no meaning unless it serves you. He pulled back to look at her eyes, gratified in her flushed face and the adoration in her expression, the spark of green fire spreading, fighting back the darkness. For him. With him. She still loved him, still had the courage to reach for him. He stood and carried her over to the bed. He set her on her leg with no apology or deference, only acceptance. He removed her clothes with patience, caressing revealed skin, taking in her new scars, her new form. She was deeply bruised from old wounds and new invasive procedures to fix her broken body. She stood still, tentative and very much like prey. Her aggression was gone. Her ferocity was gone. She didn't reach for his clothes when he removed them himself. She watched him with questioning and haunt-hidden eyes. Maybe he'd impressed on her effectively that he wanted to take care of her and not have her take care of him. Maybe she had nothing to give other than uncertainty right now. It occurred to him that she might think she wasn't beautiful anymore. Knowing her, she was making lists of things she needed to fix about herself. He was sure he shouldn't put his full weight on her body. And he was equally sure she would probably urge him to. He thought briefly that even eye contact might be too much for her. This feral creature straight from the wilds, shying from civilization and speech now that her planned words had run dry. She'd exhausted her store of bravado, and he didn't want to make her manufacture any for his benefit. He reached for her slowly, because she looked like she wanted to bolt, tension in her limbs and indecision in her eyes. He turned her so her back was to his chest, and then he pulled her into the bed with him until she was on his lap, facing away from him, parts of her upper spine against his sternum blade, with her head on his shoulder, turned away, eyes closed. He pulled the covers up and around her until she was concealed and warm, no longer exposed to eyes and air and her fears of judgment or uncertainty. She was too tentative for sharp or deep words that might startle other words into the clearings of her overactive and weary mind. He purred for her, creating a comforting constant that only waned with his indrawn breath, then began again. After long minutes like this, with warmth and vibration and concealment, he felt the tension start to flow out of her. She slowly stretched and shifted, finding the spaces where contact was most comforting to her. She tilted her head back against his shoulder and exposed her throat to him, with her eyes still closed. He scratched along the ridge at his shoulder and painted her collarbone, the side of her throat, with what was meant for her. Then he touched his tongue and dragged his mouth plate points over her shoulder and her neck. As she breathed in, her face transformed from tension to satisfaction of need. The face of having had a sip of water in the desert, but only a sip. Her face etched with deeper needs. Quick as the flicking of fire along dry tinder, she arched her head further the curve of her neck and tensing of her body unmistakable. She had always been good at giving signals. He had always been good at picking up on them. His hands caressed her hips and her waist, avoiding the bruises he'd memorized, skipping over them with obvious care so she knew he would not forget where they were. He caught a wisp of a smile in acknowledgement on her face before his hands moved up to her breasts, and she moaned, that lovely sound that accompanied her breath speeding up, causing him to do the same. His purr shifted over time to a low growl, and she pressed harder back against him. He thought in prayer, I know I've asked for a lot, but thank you, Spirit, for every moment I have had with this woman. He pressed her breasts into the palms of his hands. After time apart, they seemed impossibly soft again to his atavistic Turian senses, so responsive to his touch that her nipples pulled taut and straining between his fingers. He kissed at her throat and collarbone and shoulder, drew deft circles in the dark with talons on her breasts, perfectly content in each moment, his growl a constant. Somewhere in the middle of there, his mind decided it was time to remember if there was something he should be doing, some horror he had to handle, some reason why this wouldn't last. And he kept that thought from his hands, but it deepened the knowledge that it would happen to her also. Deep scars would twinge, deep wounds would make themselves known. His hand slipped from her breast and caressed at the muscles on her stomach, traced along a curve from hip to waist, still avoiding any spots that might cause her pain. She moved for the first time, in a way that wasn't a tensing or a stretching, lifted her hips to spread her legs wider, guided his hand down. He sheathed his talons and brushed his knuckles over the open heat of her, catching the moan she released into his mouth, pressed at her throat. He shifted her until his mouth could reach hers, and opened her mouth under his, drinking in her moans, moving his hand to support the back of her neck with his fingers curled around her throat, measuring her breathing, soaking in the heat of her skin. She whimpered and tensed as he guided a finger into her, and he knew she arched deliberately into talon points on her throat, drawing 2 drops of blood. He dipped his head to lick at the gifts from her, withdrew his finger, twisted it in again, found her clit with his thumb. They'd been apart before, and he'd learned that her first time after being apart was fast and intense, and the last thing he wanted to do was tease or deny her release. He bit at his tongue, groaned against her skin, his growl getting rougher, and he set his teeth lightly to her throat, feeling the twist and pant of her body, the clenching around his fingers start in fast accelerations of pressure to temblors, to that rhythmic, uncontrolled clenching, lightning and thunder. He kissed and nuzzled at her throat through aftershocks, shifted again until she was on her back, and he was over her, holding his weight up with his arms. He bent to kiss her breasts, bent to kiss her lips, held her mouth under his as he lifted her hips with the other hand. He pushed his cock into her slowly, growled into her mouth until he felt her react to the inrush of unaccustomed reverie. Then he pulled back, tempering her body with his. He rocked with her, slow, his control easy, tuned to her pace and her need. She felt need as clear as his own. Need was etched in every sound and every turn and twist of her. Need was in her eyes, seeking his, giving in to the discipline he lent to being just enough and not too much for her. He prayed again, silently, this time to her. One day you will laugh, and it won't be a shield or a distraction. It will be the laugh that comes from your heart and lights your eyes, and I will be there to hear it, to see it. Maybe I will be lucky enough to be the one that brings it to your lips. I will have a lifetime of being with you, nights joined with you, sharing the sound of your words and laughter carried through the muscles of your back, pressed against my chest. Wherever we are together will be home, Venri. He filled his eyes and his body with all the love and care he felt, reflecting the pleasure she gave him back to her. When she was exhausted and sated, when her hands hadn't the strength to cling to his shoulders anymore, when every line of her body had been transmuted from apprehension to mindless pleasure, he rolled to the side and pulled her against his chest. He pulled her hips tight to him until he was deep inside her to stay. He watched her eyes slip from his and close. He watched over his bondmate as she slept.